Elden Ring has been the most disruptive game that I have ever played in my entire life. It was disruptive before I even played it, because I didn't understand it.
Before we get started, let's head over to Whokeys and unlock our copy of Windows. By using coupon code TS25, you can get 25% off these prices here. I use Windows 10 Pro. You can also get Windows 10 Home, and both of these will upgrade to Windows 11. You can get that. Also, note that the Windows 10 keys have been working with Windows 11. Google it and make sure that this is still a thing whenever you're purchasing your key. Also, I want to note that if you get Windows 10 Home and you upgrade it to Windows 11, they will force you to use an online account. With Windows 11 Pro, however, you can use a local account, just so you know. You can also get Office 2019 with that same discount, or if you like, you can get Windows 10 Pro and Office 2019 in a bundle and save even more. So go ahead and put TS25 in here as your coupon code, hit apply, and then you can see we can get Windows 10 Pro for $14.85. Once you're finished, if you want to access your key, you click on your name on the top right, click on User Center, and you'll see My Purchase Orders. Right here, you'll be able to view the keys that you've purchased just by clicking on View Keys and Codes. Then you will see your code right here. Just go ahead and copy this code, press Start, type Activate, and you'll see activation settings come up. Click on that. Then click Change Product Key. Right there, you can paste in your code and hit Next, and then you will be activated. It's very simple. So don't pay those retail prices for your copy of Windows or Office. Head over to whokeys.com and use coupon code TS25.
I kept looking at the reviews, these perfect scores, these amazing reviews, and wondering what they knew that I didn't know. Why didn't I understand this? And why does everyone defend From Software so hard whenever I ask questions or pose criticisms? Why is there so much pushback? What am I not getting? What do the fans know? What do these critics know that I don't know? So I finally decided that it's time to install a From Software game. I uninstalled it twice, but I installed it 3 times. In my first install, I went through the little tutorial and then came into the world and saw the tree sentinel and thought that that was my first objective. I should take that thing out because it's right there. Right when I first come out, I didn't realize that this was like a mid-game boss almost. So I spent the first 30 or 40 minutes dying repeatedly and wondering, why is this fun? Why does anyone put up with this kind of punishment? And people would tell me to get good, and I'd hear all that stuff, and I'd have that playing in the back of my head, the voices from people whom I don't even know. I got frustrated and uninstalled it, and then I went online and complained. My frustration posting was met with extreme defensiveness. Instead of help, I was mostly told to stop playing. I was told that I was playing their game. I was told that that not everything is for everyone, that games don't have to cater to me, and that I don't have to understand it. I felt this weird need to understand it because I want to make games. And here's a little clip from something we're working on, but we have a little game world that we've put together here. We've got characters, we've got a dialogue system that works. The thing that we're missing right now is monsters and someone to animate them. So being someone that aspires to make games, I like to understand the appeal of different games. And sometimes I'll just write it off and be like, you know what, this game's goofy, I don't care about it, it's a gotcha game, so I don't care about it. But this one was universally praised, and Metacritic says it's the best game of all time. At the point in time when I was looking at this, it was rated like almost perfect. So I felt an even stronger need to understand what was going on with this game. Felt dumb for not getting it. I didn't want to go and go through a bunch of online tutorials or watch a bunch of videos on how to cheat and farm and stuff like that. I wanted to figure it out on my own. I would try to sleep, and I couldn't because I kept thinking like, what is it? What makes... And I just could not wrap my mind around it. Finally, I installed it a 3rd time and decided to run past the tree sentinel and avoid some of the bad guys. And that's when it hit me that this game is doing one of the things that I have been screaming about for the longest time. It's forcing you to run away to fight again another day. And that's something that I think tabletop RPGs used to do. Like I played a lot of original D&D and 2nd Ed. I feel like a lot of the modern tabletop RPGs, I feel like the focus is shifted from the struggle to making sure that the balance is there so that at any time you're always, put up against a foe that you can best because it's balanced and that's the goal. But I think they've lost a little something in the tabletop arena by removing a lot of the struggle and removing the catharsis that goes along with returning to a foe that you could not beat and then besting that foe. That is what this game is about, and nobody told me about that. There were a few other things that nobody told me that I had to find out on my own. So I don't play a lot of JRPGs because I'm not a big fan of grind. I like things to progress in a way that goes along with the leveling of your character, and having to stop the momentum of the story to grind was always something that I kind of just stayed away from. So I feel like a lot of the really awesome stories that are in JRPGs, I feel sad that I've missed them out, but I just cannot get into the gameplay. This game is about grind, but it's also about the builds. And that's something I didn't know from the beginning and nobody told me. I didn't realize that, getting a +4 sword was going to give me that much of an advantage so that I could kill the boss that had killed me 40 times. I could kill him in one go after leveling my sword up to +4. I didn't realize it was going to be that big of a deal. And I realized the difficulty in this game is almost optional depending on how much you're willing to grind and level your character. And that's all stuff I did not know going into this because I didn't know anything about the From Software games and how they work. And there's somewhat unique blend of grind and learning through death and putting together a build that can just knock down everything in your path. Funny, because the way I found out about this is I was streaming this and opened up my character sheet or whatever, and someone in the comments was like, oh, you got a quality build. And I was like, what's a quality build? And they're like, oh, you've leveled strength and dex. That's what we call the quality build. And I was like, the quality build? So I Googled the quality build and then found out that there's a whole world of different builds that people talk about. And then they start to talk about how they can cheese the game and how they can go crazy with, doing a bleed build or whatever. And then I started watching people break the game with mages and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is a giant math problem. It kind of opened up to me then. Now, that is not my kind of game. That is not what I enjoy playing. But for some reason, I keep coming back. And that's what I want to talk about, the reasons that I keep coming back and the reasons that I do think this game is special. I'm not going to hedge in this video. There's going to be a lot of stuff I say that you disagree with, and that is totally fine. I'm not going to try to cut off your comments by saying, like, I know in the comments you're about to say that I'm wrong. I'm not going to hedge. I'm not going to make apologies. I'm just going to state my piece. And then, you can comment if you want to. You can tell me I'm wrong. And that's fine. We can have a discussion, but I'm not gonna try to preface everything just to make sure that I reach the most sensitive person in the room. I understand that there's a lot of sensitivities when it comes to this game, and I realize that I'm going to offend a lot of people by stating that the game is not perfect, which it's not. There's a lot of flaws, and I think it's extremely important that we criticize the things that we love. I've been pushing back harder on this game than most. There are games that are far worse that I criticize far less. And the reason I push back so hard on this is because I think it's important to criticize the things that we love. It's important to criticize and see the faults in the things that we consider to be nearly perfect. And I also push back harder on this game because a lot of people tend to make excuses or try to justify even the things that are just blatantly bad design decisions or mistakes or bugs or errors. They try to pretend that From Software is, an infallible entity, and they're not. That's just fanboy or fangirl nonsense. So I do push back a little bit harder, and I will apologize that I am playing your game. I will apologize that I'm playing it with the mouse instead of playing it with a controller like you're supposed to. So I apologize for all of those things. I'm sorry in advance. I'm not going to apologize anymore. I'm just going to go into it. In praise of struggle. Struggle is the journey, and I think a lot of people have missed that. Like you see a lot of AAA games, they just take an open world and just fill it with mindless chores and distractions that really don't matter, just to make it feel like it's full of stuff. When I play a game like Far Cry 5 or something like that, I can goof off and run around, mow down bad guys, and they just keep respawning in all these random different places. And it's the same thing over and over again, and it feels like I'm doing something. And if I just want to de-stress and chill out for a little while, yeah, that's fine. But once you get to a certain level with your character, there's not that much of a struggle. And everything kind of feels samey, and there's no real reason to be doing anything because you're not leveling your character or anything. You're just kind of driving around, getting maybe a little bit better of a gun or something like that. So Elden Ring really brought me back to my early days of playing tabletop RPGs, where the struggle was the biggest part of the journey and the most important part of the experience, and it was the fun. The fun was getting there, and that's where this game excels. It's all about getting there. The beautiful thing about Elden Ring is the struggle is not confined to a small area like it was in the previous From Software games, and that's one of the things that drew me to this, was this giant open world. When I hit a brick wall of difficulty in one spot, all I would do is just hop on torrent and wander aimlessly through the world and check out all these enemies. I can't believe how many enemies are in this game. They all have different movesets. They all have different patterns, and they all provide unique challenges for you to overcome. So I could roam around the world, get a few smithing stones, collect maybe some new gear, level up my character a couple of times, and then come back to the brick wall of difficulty that I was stopped by before, and then just breeze right through it. And that was a pretty interesting feeling, a nice rewarding feeling. There is a point, though, where the struggling turns into punishment. And I've said this over and over and on my streams, and I want this to be in a positive light. The developers are assholes. And I mean that in a loving way. I'm talking about like an asshole who buys you a beer, pats you on the back, and then when you go to the bathroom, they swap your beer out for a glass of jasmine tea. And so you come back and you sit down and you take a sip and you're like, oh, what the hell is this? And then they laugh at you as you fall onto the floor. And then you get back up and they switch it back with a regular beer and you take another sip and you're like, okay, that's back to normal. I feel like the developers are messing with me through this game. I feel like they're my friends and they are ribbing me. They are goofing around with me. They are assholes. They know they're assholes, and we're all having fun together. Now they'll put an enemy like behind a wall, and when you get close, an animation will trigger where the enemy will come out and stab you in the back, or it will drop down from the ceiling. So at first I really thought that they've gone too far. Like, this is just, how was I supposed to know that enemy was going to stab me in the back? And it just happened to be the enemy that killed me. You know, I was really frustrated. But then I noticed something. The way I was playing the game changed. Instead of just running around aimlessly and going full speed through these dungeons, now around every corner lurks potential death. So I would stop at just the edge and try to turn my camera just enough to see if there's something around there. I ended up looking up at the ceiling a lot more because I'm like, is there going to be a damn goblin that's going to drop on me? And then just as soon as I think I'm used to that, I notice an enemy around a corner and I'm like, okay, there's an enemy there. I can get him. I see him first. So I would lock onto him, roll into the room and hit him. And as soon as I did that, an enemy would fall off the ceiling and like land on my back. And it was like, I swear to God, these asshole devs. You know, I think the developers are assholes. I think they're trolls. But I really like how they have trained me as the player to play in a more cautious way. And it builds a lot of tension. And that's something that I think is missing from even a lot of like the FPS games that I play these days. One of the, John Romero's School of Design 101, he likes to mix periods of intense combat with tense exploration. And this is one of the best ways to get tense exploration, by just telling the player that they're never safe. Even if you don't see any enemies, there's nothing around, you're never safe. And that tension is a core part of the exploration when it comes to dungeons, caves, and stuff like that, mines and all that. Now you can contrast that with the open world, where there are a lot of enemies everywhere waiting to kill you, but if you want to explore, you can easily avoid them just by running around them. You can pull aggro, but they're not fast. None of the enemies are fast enough to keep up with you while you're on your horse, even the ones on horseback. That all changes when you meet the first bear, especially those ginormous bears, the ones that are like swole with the huge arms and chest. Those things are way too fast, and they will chase you to the end of the earth. But that also is one of those things where I feel like the developer was like, all right, you're getting into a mode where you're pretty comfortable wandering around the world, and you realize you don't have to worry about an enemy chasing you to the end of the earth, except for this fucking bear! This bear's gonna kill you! And it's like, even in the open world, you still have to watch out for a few things, but by and large, it is a nice dichotomy of experiences to wander around and explore the world, and then to lean into your computer, lean into your controller, get a little tense, get a little tension going, and start experiencing some of the dungeons. I'm really glad I kept playing this game, because it's rare that a game does this, but it's given me some moments that I'm going to remember for a long time. You know, those moments that you rarely experienced in a game. When you look back on the game 10 years later, those are the things you remember. Just sometimes it's just a feeling. Sometimes it's just the way everything comes together. And this game has done that a few different times. You know, it's almost like those moments where you just can't put a finger on them. Like, what's so good here? It's like, is it more fun right here? No, not necessarily. It's just a lot of things came together and made something that was almost transcendent. These beautiful moments that almost feel perfect. And that happened to me a couple times. The first time was when I was running around on a meadow, and I'm just going in circles with Torrent, and it's like this mesmerizing swirl that I've got going on in circles. And then there's a bunch of fire mages, and they're all shooting fire, and it's like dimly lit, gently sloping terrain, and and these fire mages just providing this glowing illumination as I roll around in circles or run around in circles and hit them. And there was something about that that's just going to stick in my head. Where everything just comes together, the mechanics come together, the movement of the enemies, the movement of your weapons, the swirling and movement of torrent. So that happened a few different times. Those moments where you really just sit back and you're like, yes, of course, games are art. All right, now it's time to criticize a few things. I'm going to start by saying that I appreciate the community, but I also would like to criticize the community a little bit, and I'm going to get some pushback, but I don't care. So when I first started playing this game, there were a couple people in the community that did help, and they were very patient with me. They put up with a lot of my frustration. They put up with a lot of my bullshit. They put up with a lot of my complaining of like, why is this so frustrating and annoying? But I think I can maybe help you to introduce new players to this genre. You need to explain to them that this game is about the build of your character. When people tell me to level up, that didn't tell me the same thing as when I discovered that this game was about builds. You need to explain to them that they need to run away. If an enemy's too difficult, stop grinding. It doesn't have to be about the grind because there's a huge open world to explore, and the grind will happen naturally. Explain that to them. I thought this was going to be just beating my head against the wall, trying to beat the same boss over and over and over with underpowered gear. That's not what this is about. If you want to go and find a resource pool and grind like that, you can. I don't know where those are. I know that people have been talking about them. I know people have sent me even videos being like, oh, just go here and you'll get 20,000 runes an hour or something like that. I generally tend to stay away from stuff like that, and I think it's weird that people will defend everything about the game, including that, because it feels like that cheapens my experience. All this stuff was put here, and they're like, oh, well, the game was so frustrating that the developers were smart enough to realize that they needed to put almost a cheat into the game. And so that makes me feel like the arguments of, the virtues of this system, the virtues of the difficulty, the virtues of the grind, are basically defeated by the developers themselves when they put in these, quick and easy cheats, essentially, these places where you can just grind or just basically stand still and let the runes flow. And, every hour you get like a gazillion runes. You can level yourself up to 90 in a matter of a day or so. I believe that completely defeats the argument for how the difficulty is a core part of the experience, because if you just do that, you can overcome it. So you can't praise the developer for being a genius for making a game that's this difficult without any difficulty settings, while at the same time praising the developer for creating these methods that, oh, if you're just smart enough as a player, well, then you can just completely cheat and get 1,000,000 runes and break the game. I feel like that's a really ridiculous argument. That brings me to the difficulty overall. Have you ever heard someone say, I really enjoy this game. It's a lot of fun. However, I opened up the menu and there were difficulty options. So that really just ruins the experience. This game sucks. I've never heard anyone say that. I've never heard anyone argue that they were playing a game and it was potentially good until they discovered, oh, there's difficulty settings, it's ruined. That means that other people who are not as good as me can play. That makes me angry. I've never heard anyone make that argument, yet I will hear people over and over argue that the difficulty is the point of this game. And they police the way that people have fun by saying that everyone should play it at the same difficulty because that is the experience and it would break the From Software, model of play. I understand where this comes from. I understand that people who play it this way find the rewards to be significant. Just like when I used to play Dungeons & Dragons a certain way that was, maybe a little bit more difficult than some other people would play it. Characters died more often when you played in my campaigns and stuff, and I would argue that this is the way to play the game. And if you're not playing it this way, you're doing it wrong because you don't understand how good it is when you experience it this way, when you experience the struggle this way. It's going to be better, and maybe you're right. But you're also pushing your rules for fun onto others. You are policing the way others have fun. Nothing will stop you from playing the game on the hardest difficulty setting. Now, there's another concern. People are worried about the casualization of games. They think that if you were to add in, difficulty settings, then a whole bunch of casuals are going to show up and they're going to take over the game, and then it's going to push From Software software to cater to them more than the core audience, and it's going to water down the experience for future games? Does the fact that the Final Fantasy games have like a tactician mode? I'm not sure if it's Final Fantasy or whatever, and a lot of the other JRPGs, you can play them with or without a lot of the grind. Even the old games like Monkey Island that are click adventures had options to change the difficulty of the puzzles. Did that change the core experience of those games? I think what draws people to this game is the rewards that you get from the struggle, but also the overall style and feel of the game. This is a grim, dark game. It's not going to attract people who are not into grim, dark, grindy RPGs with really heavy, weighty combat. This game is for a specific audience, and having difficulty options is not going to change that. The core of the game is still going to stay the same, and I don't think that From Software is a company that would cater to anyone. They make the game that they want to make. So I really don't think that there's any danger of this game turning into something casual just because it has difficulty options. Now, is that an accessibility option? I don't think I agree with that entirely, because it is an artistic choice, like making a game really difficult and deciding to stick to those guns. I believe that is an artistic choice that has merit. But I also believe that art without criticism is less valuable. I believe that we can derive a lot of the value from art by criticizing it. It creates the conversations that accompany the art, and I think that gives it far more value. So I think the discussion of difficulty settings is a key part of the artwork. And, if it goes in the other direction and it does get difficulty settings, that's going to change the discussion, and the artistic value will change as a result. Now, I think that it is a bad artistic decision to have no difficulty options. I think it is an elitist and an exclusive decision. To me, it's almost as if someone created a really beautiful painting but only allowed people who were a certain height to go see it. Because only people who are willing to put up with a certain amount of grind, or people who are, willing to get good, are able to experience all of this game. Now, 30% of the people who play this game have beaten the first boss. And I saw that praised as like a good high number. But at the same time, that's such a small part of the game. How many people are going to get to experience the late game? 20, 30%, the hardcore. This game sold a lot of copies. How many people are going to miss out because it's too hard and they put it down? Would it not be better if everyone could experience the world and share in the memes and share in the culture that this game is creating? Because this game is going to change the culture a little bit. This game is going to be a part of our culture.
I do want to talk about gatekeeping. That's a fun thing to talk about. I used to be in that category of person who looked at a lot of the new games coming out when the indie scene was exploding, and I started seeing walking simulators and stuff, and I said, what is the point? This is not a game. What are you doing? This is a walking simulator. And I sort of looked down on them. I hadn't played any of them at the time, but in my opinion, those were not games, because I had, played a lot of really difficult games on the Nintendo, then the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, and just, I'm used to games having mechanics and making you do things. You have to jump, you have to dodge, you have to attack, you have to climb. It's engaging, and it's a game. You get a reward when you're done because you've beat the boss and all that kind of stuff. And then these walking simulators came out, and you walk and you hear a story. And I've heard people recently say this, and I was taken aback, but people would say, why would you do that? We already have something to fulfill that need. It's called a movie. Just go watch a movie. I saw someone say that on Twitter, and I was like, oh God, that's an awful attitude. And then I remembered back in the day, that was the exact same attitude I had with games like Gone Home and stuff. It's an incredibly toxic attitude. You see, here's the way gatekeeping works. You can have all the fun you want. You can beat the bosses without taking any damage if you want to. If you want to sit and grind and learn, and beat them with no summons, no armor, and just the starter weapon, and take no damage, chipping away at them slowly, and you want to do that and then pat yourself on the back and say, I beat this boss without taking any damage, and you can feel good about yourself. That's all valid. You're allowed to do all these things. But as soon as you turn around and say, like, if other people can't do the same thing, they're shit. That's when you cross the line. As soon as you stop minding your own business and start telling other people how to have fun, that's when you start gatekeeping. And that's what the difficulty settings are all about. No one is telling you how to play your game. No one is telling you to play on easy mode. And when you start saying that the game must be so difficult that many people are unable to play, that's when you're gatekeeping, because you are keeping people from being able to experience the art that they want to be able to experience. And now what's weird is, I've said these things, and people have attacked me for saying them. People are saying, one of the interesting transactions I had in all this was someone called me a gatekeeper for telling them that they couldn't gatekeep, and it went a little something like this. They were like, so I suppose it's your way or the highway. All games must cater to the way you want to play. And I was like, it's not about my way, because I want to play it with difficulty, not maybe all the way up, but I am playing it all the way up, and I'm having a good time. I wish it was a little easier on some of the bosses. I don't like grinding as much, but, it is what it is, and I'm playing it. I would much rather it have smaller, lower difficulty, but mainly I see people who cannot play, and I've got friends who just won't even touch the game. Like, literally will not touch the game because they do not want to deal with the stress of dying a million times. But they want to play it. They look at the world, and they're like, man, that looks like a lot of fun. I wish I could, get into that. So you're keeping them from playing it. So me arguing that they should be able to play at a lower difficulty setting is not keeping them from playing, it's enabling them to play. So the only thing it's keeping is your ability to gatekeep. And you can't gatekeep someone from being able to gatekeep. That's nonsense. We don't want you to be intolerant, so all of a sudden we're intolerant. That's ridiculous logic. Now, after all that, I want to say that it's okay if the artists decide that it's so difficult that only certain types of people can play it. That's their artistic choice. But that artistic choice is gatekeeping, and I am willing to argue the artistic merits of gatekeeping. That's something we can go back and forth, about. There may actually be artistic merits for gatekeeping that I'm missing. I don't think there are, so I'm going to argue the other way. I will only come at this argument from the artistic standpoint. We can argue the artistic merits of gatekeeping. Otherwise, I believe the argument's nonsense, and I'm not willing to participate in it.
But let's talk about the open world, shall we? Because that's one of the big selling points, is they've moved the Soulsborne formula to the open world. And I think it's a genius thing to do because it allows you to spread the grinding out across a vast area. It's far more obtuse, and it doesn't hold your hand. Those are the two big things that separate it from all the other AAA games. It allows the player to have more agency, and it does not insult the player's intelligence. Otherwise, it's still somewhat similar. There are different sections of the world, and we have the points of grace, which save spots and areas where we can travel between. So that's going to be similar to like the towers you get in Ubisoft games and all that. The difference is we have separate spots where you get the maps. I don't think this diverged from the open world formula as much as something like Breath of the Wild, and it certainly is not in the same vein as like the Elder Scrolls games. I don't think this comes anywhere close to Morrowind's freedom when it comes to the open world, though it is about as obtuse as Morrowind. And I really enjoy the fact that we don't have constant nagging nonsense going on. We don't have tons of information on the screen like in Cyberpunk, where it's like always saying like, look here, go here, here's the spot on your map. So we're not following a mini map all over. In fact, there's not even a mini map. And as you can see on the screen here, I've removed my compass from my screen because I feel like that's kind of just, who cares anyway? Once you learn the land a little bit, you don't need it. It gets in the way. It's right in the middle of the screen. It's in a terrible spot. And so I've just removed the compass, and I think it looks a lot better. I open up my map when I need to, and that's all I need. Having said that, the open world is really more of the same in lots of different places. It's beautiful to look at. It's an awesome fantasy world, but everywhere you go is very similar in mechanical style. Mostly just going to find new enemies, and there is where the real variety lies with how you deal with the different enemies. It's really just an open world in that it's huge and you can explore it, but everything is mostly still out to kill you. This game has an immense sense of scale, but I don't know, I feel like Breath of the Wild had an even bigger sense of scale. The other thing that's interesting about Breath of the Wild when you compare it directly to this, Breath of the Wild had more white space, which is interesting because that doesn't sound like fun, but the movement mechanics, climbing, jumping, using your glider, really made just traveling through the world an experience. That plus each section having different cultures and different people, different quests and things like that. I think that Breath of the Wild is a much more full-featured open world game. And this is really a combat game that has a giant open world as the arena for your combat. The only reason that I keep coming back to this game is because I want to explore this ginormous, beautiful world. But I also understand that this is just a huge playground where I can go and kill enemies. It's not going to give me the same level of nuance, and it may not be quite as special as some of the other open world games, but I really just appreciate that we have an open world to grind in. The transitions between one section and another are very just kind of rough around the edges. They don't care. They know it's a game. They're just throwing
in different tile sets into different areas. They're like, okay, this is going to be red, and there's going to be scarlet rot here, and it'll be really pretty. This area is going to have trees, and this area is going to have a swamp. And you can, the divisions between one area and another are usually pretty like, okay, there's a line here, and then when we cross that line, we're in a different area. It's not really a gradual crescendo from one terrain to the next, or one biome to the next. But, that's fine. It's a game, and like I said before, this game knows it's a game, and that's pretty cool. Biggest issue really with the difficulty is the fact that if you're someone who's new to this genre and if you've never played a From Software game before, there's a lot of things that you will not understand and you'll end up frustrated, just like I was. And when you ask people questions, a lot of times they've been playing these games for years and years and years. It's like when someone new shows up to the Linux community or someone new shows up to my D&D game and they don't know what spell is on page 44 and you're like, ugh, I have to deal with this. I know it's really, really rough, but the game doesn't make it any easier. The tutorial is there. That's all I can say for it, but none of the stuff is really explained in the game. I didn't know what an Ashes of War did. I didn't know that you were invincible when you were dodging. Learning things on your own is really awesome. And I do appreciate that the game does not hold my hand. In fact, when you contrast this with modern AAA games, they're almost patronizing. But this one is so far in the other direction that it becomes obtuse and strange. If you've played a lot of From Software games, you get it. It's normal. But if you're new to this, a lot of it is just so obtuse and so, counter to the way that we normally play games that it seems completely foreign. Even now, after playing the game for hours and hours, being almost level 90, every time I open my map, on the keyboard you press the G key, because I tried the M key first. G key makes sense because it's closer to where your hand is, so I do appreciate that. But then in order to leave the map, with most games you press the map button again to toggle the map on and toggle it off. But when you press the G button again, it brings up a tutorial, which confuses me. At least that becomes the pause button, unless you wanted to mod it with the pause button like I did, but that becomes sort of like your pause. You just press the map button twice and you've got a menu. But every time I open my map, I go to close my map, and I press the G key again, and it opens up the tutorial, and I go, damn it! Every single time. What I'm supposed to do is press the Q button to go back, because Q is the button that I have mapped as the button that corresponds to whatever the back button is on the controller. I think it's B, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm constantly pressing G to open the map, and then have to remember to press Q. It's not intuitive at all. Like, it's so far beyond what I'm used to that every single time I do it, I mess up. I don't think I've ever done it correctly. Like, never. It's so obtuse that I cannot learn it. And I found that navigating the menus with a mouse, navigating the map with a mouse, and just using the game, it is clunky. Like, almost unforgivably clunky. It's different, which is nice. It's its own system. It's the way it's been for years and years and years. But really, the menu systems and stuff like that are kind of a chore. Now, if you've been playing this for a long time and you've got Stockholm Syndrome, a lot of this clunky, janky stuff becomes part of the game's charm. And I understand that because Oblivion's one of my favorite games, and it's really janky. And I do like to make excuses for some of the jank because, to me, it's become the charm of the game. Some of the messes and some of the junk, some of the nonsense, that's become the charm of the game. But a lot of people, when they first play it, find a lot of reason to criticize it. So maybe if I'd been playing all the From Software games, at this point, I would just be like, oh, it's charming. Look how clunky it is. Oh, I love it. It just makes me feel at home. But this is my first From Software game, and it's frustratingly clunky, and I don't like it. Otherwise, the PC performance is a mess. And even with the last updates, I think we're on 3 now or something, 1.03, it still stutters a lot. When I had it installed on my regular spinning hard drive, it stuttered nonstop. It was unplayable. I had to move it to an M.2 NVMe drive, and then I could play it. However, in some parts of the world, no matter what I do, it'll stutter and crash. Whenever you're moving from one section of the world to another, it stutters a lot. The performance on PC is terrible. I've got a 3080 and a 5950X. It should be buttery smooth. So while I feel like the open world is nice because it's big and interesting to explore, this is not a regular RPG. There's not a lot of NPCs. There's side quests, but not as many. A lot of this is just you roaming around and exploring and looking at all the monsters and all the animations and just finding new areas to struggle, essentially. You just go from place to place. Everything's out to kill you, and you're out to kill everything. And that's really all I care about when it comes to the plot. Speaking of the plot,
I don't even know what it is. I'm like level 90 something. I don't know. It's something about a ring, and then every time you talk to anybody, it's always like, oh, the fingers casting shadows upon the lake, and the twilight will gleam dark, and will you, just blah, blah, blah. Like, most of it just feels like a lot of nonsense. There are some characters that are fun and that have more, normal dialogue. It's less cryptic. Most of the core dialogue is very cryptic and weird. So yeah, there's a story in there somewhere, but this game would be almost the same without a story. The characters are more important than the story. The crazy turtle with the Pope hat is more important than the actual story. So this is a game where its charm lies in the characters and not the overall story. It's all just atmosphere. Everything is atmosphere for the combat. Speaking of atmosphere, the music is also very atmospheric, and I believe most of it I would categorize as being background atmosphere. However, there's so much music, and I really like the fact that we're using real instruments here. We have some real music, we've got woodwinds going strong, we've got, the string section coming in strong. Whenever you enter into a big battle, the themes are there. We actually have music. We have notes. And that's a nice contrast to a lot of the modern games where music is really just some background noise that you would never listen to this stuff on your own. It's just there for the game. You don't even need a soundtrack. But this game has a few songs on the soundtrack that really stand out. Some of it's just like, I feel like they let the musicians just go crazy. They're like, hey, create whatever you want, just, give it some folky elements, make sure it has a certain vibe or whatever, and they allowed them to do it. So you'll see in some of the boss battles, we just have this music that is really, really good. But most of the time, the music in the background is just there for ambiance, and I won't be listening to most of the tracks on this album outside of, the actual in-game experience. But overall, the music does help to fit the mood. There was another one of those points in the game when I first reached, into the caves, and there are these dudes mining. There's all these weird creatures mining. I don't even know what they're called. They've got these glowing sticks, and they're mining with it. And then I bothered them. And as soon as I bothered them, the background hum started to come alive with woodwinds, mostly clarinets and oboes and maybe a bassoon or two in there. But there was like this clatter, this cacophonous clatter that turned into music. And I'm jumping around trying to dodge these very slow-moving creatures that are mining. And everything's blue and purple, and we've got these woodwinds going. And it was another one of those moments where I'm feeling like, okay, this is something I can't exactly put my finger on. There's some beauty here that is transcending the medium. That happened. Not because of what was going on in the game, but that happened because of the inclusion of the music and the way it gradually builds. So the music is also something that really adds to the experience of this game. So after playing it for a while, being new to the genre, do I think it deserves the perfect scores?
A lot of them are scared of the audience. I'm not scared of you all. They are worried about death threats if they give it anything less than 100% A+ perfect game. We have to be able to criticize things, especially if we love them. And if you ever say that anything is perfect, then I do not value your opinion on that subject.
Well, on PC, it does not deserve those perfect scores. I think it is a very solid 7 or 8. I probably would say around a 7.5, and that is only because of all of the stuttering, the PC issues, and the terrible support for mouse and keyboard. I played this game with a mouse and keyboard like a crazy person, and at first it was really difficult. I had to turn my sensitivity down to the lowest setting, and then I also had to crank my DPI or my CPI on my mouse way down, or else the camera would just be completely ridiculous and I couldn't control it. I also run a mod to keep the FOV a little bit wider, just 9%, just so I can see a slightly more of the screen, because I was finding that enemies, when they were behind me, I wasn't able to see what was going on as much, and they were, biting me in the ankles, and I was like, I didn't even see you back there. So pulling the FOV back 9% fixed that issue for me, and then I found that I was having a pretty good experience with the mouse and keyboard. I had some pretty interesting interactions with the community, mostly toxic. The funniest one was someone called me one of those mouse and keyboard elitists, and then in the next sentence said, everyone knows that the only way to play this game is with a controller. And then he said, so stop using a mouse and keyboard, you stupid boomer. So I was called an elitist while being told that the only way to play was with a controller. And then he said, everyone knows the only way to play this game is with a controller, you stupid boomer. I think irony might be lost on some in the community. He didn't realize that opposed policing the way I play, while also calling me an elitist, was ironic. So I was told over and over and over again to use a controller. But I tried for a day, and that was the second time I uninstalled the game, was because I was so frustrated with the controller. I'm not very good with the controller. I even play games like Beyond Good and Evil, which is another third-person game with a mouse and keyboard. And I even played Skyward Sword on my PC with a mouse and keyboard. It was difficult, but, I did it. Breath of the Wild is one of the games I did get used to on the controller, but even then I was frustrated with how much fussing I had to do, moving between menus and stuff on that game. Speaking of difficulty, there's one thing I did that drastically changed my experience for the better, and that is I installed a mod. God forbid. Whether you like it or not, I'm someone who believes that games are supposed to be fun, and if they're not fun but I still want to play them, I think that it's okay to change them. I think that it's okay to mod them. Now, I don't want every game to cater to exactly what I want. There's a lot of games that I just don't have to play because they don't cater to me. I don't need to play every game, but I really wanted to play this game, and there were a couple of things for me that would change my experience for the better. So what I installed was simply a mod that allowed me to collect my runes as soon as I respawned. You just press the E button, or the, I guess on your controller be the A button or B button, I don't know. You just press the button after you respawn and all your runes come back to you. You don't have to do a body run. Now, I know that a lot of times people think that body runs are a core part of the experience, they're a core part of the learning, and they're also, especially in the older Soulsborne games, they're also one of the ways that you gain the most experience, because we don't have a whole open world to farm. We have to continually go through the same areas, and the enemies are going to respawn, which annoys the hell out of me when I'm in like these small areas. I hate rebeating the same parts of the game over and over and over again. Once I've beat the first and second part of this, but I keep dying on the third, I get really bored when I have to replay the portions of the game that I've already completed. And when I'm also punished to the point where I'm losing my runes, well, then I just don't want to play. It frustrates me so much that it's like not worth my time. I feel like the game does not respect my time. There are a lot of really cheap ways to die. So sometimes if you lose your runes and it's in a really difficult spot, or maybe like the worst is when I would fall off the edge of some really high precipice, and in order to get my runes back, I would have to go with this janky horse or these difficult controls on the edge of some like ridiculous cliffside that I'm probably going to fall off of again because I shouldn't have been there in the first place. And I get there and I'm about to get my runes and I fall off again and lose all of my runes. It's like that 2 steps forward, 1 step back gameplay that I really didn't like. So I added this mod so that I could have my runes back. And that completely changed the game for me for the better. I am so much more chill, I am so much happier, and I am having more fun. And I won't have anybody telling me how to have fun. If I'm having more fun this way, then you need to fuck off and let me have my fun. And don't tell me that your way of having fun is better. This is subjective. It's not objective. And one of the things that I found that changed once I installed this mod is now I'm more willing to explore. Before, I was always really worried about exploring the edges of cliffs, or sometimes I would try to climb around on the outside of castles, and I was always too afraid to do that because I didn't want to fall and have to like have a really strange spot where my runes were and have to go back and risk falling again to get my runes. But now I'm willing to run around on the edge of cliffs and jump and look for secrets and try to climb down on things and fall off ledges that are maybe a bit too high for me. So being able to do that really made the exploration a lot more enjoyable for me. Otherwise, removing that one piece of grind from the game, I find that I am raging far less and that I'm frustrated far less. Frustration may be a big part of this game for you, but for me, I want to enjoy the combat, I want to enjoy the difficulty, but I don't want to be punished for exploring, and I don't want to be punished for simple mistakes, and I don't want to lose too many runes. There were a couple of times, I was carrying around enough runes to level up a couple of times after going through a really tough area and just getting lots of runes and being frustrated, being like, there hasn't been a point of grace in such a long time. Where am I going to save? And then I would die. And then I would respawn somewhere that was really, really difficult, and then something cheap would happen. I would get my poise broken by something I didn't see, and then insta-killed. And I would just sit there thinking like, oh my God, an hour of my time, all the runes I picked up for the last hour are just gone. And I don't have more than a few hours a day, a couple hours a day to play this game. So it's like, this is going to take forever. It was so demotivational that I wanted to stop playing. Otherwise, I didn't need to change the difficulty. After I level, I can usually come back and kill most bosses in a couple times. A lot of the small bosses that are in like the dungeons and stuff, as long as I use summons, I can, like 90% of the time I kill them in one try. Just because I'll use a summon, I'll summon my +4 wolf pack and then just go crazy and break their poison. It'll be over, The big bosses are still pretty difficult, but that's okay. That's part of the experience. But I'm able to like explore. I'm more of an explorer than a grinder. And this game has allowed me to do that. And that's why this game is appealing to so many more people. It's appealing to people who are not just about the grind, because you can get the grind and the exploration at the same time, and that's the brilliance of it. I can't believe how much work they did on the enemies. Some of them are beautiful. I love the giant humanoidal vampire bat things. I'm sure there's a name for them, and you can tell me what they are in the comments. But those singing vampire bats are genius. I love those things. I think Stephanie Sterling's favorite enemy is also one of my favorites, the little toadmen that roam around in the swamp and do cartwheels. The first time I saw one of those do cartwheels, I had to stop and get just outside of their range and keep moving outside of their range so I could watch the cartwheels over and over again and just giggle. The women who dance in the mountain villages and laugh. Speaking of giggling, their laughter is contagious. They dance around, and then when you get close, well, they stab you in the back and they bite themselves and spew blood at you. There's some brilliant enemies in this game, and I can't even imagine how much time they spent creating all these enemies. I don't know if some of these have been rehashed from older games or what, but even if they were, the variety of enemies is ridiculous. And it's not just like they have, humanoid enemies that all have the same set of animations. They have all sorts of enemies in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and even if you get an enemy that's like seems like it's going to be the same because that's a humanoid, it must have the same moveset as the other humanoids. No, sometimes it's going to be fast, sometimes it's going to do strange jumps. It's going to have a totally different fighting style, and that keeps things feeling really fresh as you wander around in the world. Every time I think I've seen every enemy in this game, there's 3 more enemies that show up, and I'm like, well, what are these? So I don't think I've ever seen a game with this much variety when it comes to enemies. The same can be said for most of the weapons and armor as well, but some of the MMOs out there are going to be like, well, we've got more weapons and armor and stuff. But even then, there are so many different types of weapon in this game that have their own animations, their own feel. Once you really get into the game, you're going to find that, I really enjoy dexterity weapons that move really fast, or no, I really enjoy these big, heavy strength weapons. Like, I didn't expect to enjoy the big, heavy strength weapons, but I ended up playing with a pickaxe. Just a standard pickaxe, not a special one, not a god tier pickaxe, just a regular pickaxe that I leveled up to 13 and put a Frost Stomp Ashes of War on there to make it like 400 or 500 damage with every hit. This thing hits hard, and for my playstyle, I like to be more offensive. This works. Even though it's slower, it staggers the hell out of the enemies, so I can just sit there and pound them over and over and over with this thing while they stagger from the force of the blows. The combat can feel drastically different depending upon your equipment and your playstyle, and that makes the enemies also feel different depending upon what equipment they have and the speed of the character mostly. So would I recommend this game to everybody? No. Would I recommend this game to people who like open worlds? Possibly, but you have to understand that this is not a game with a big story and a lot of dialogue. This is a game about really satisfying character development. Open world games have needed help. They've been very stale for a very long time because market research said open world games are the future. And so next thing you know, everything has to be open world, but the developers, a lot of times don't have enough content to put in open world, so they have to artificially create a ton of content to make the game feel bigger than it really is. So I hope that other open world games, they don't need to be this big. I don't think they need to aspire to be this big. But I do hope that other open world games look at this, and I don't want them to like think that difficulty is the reason people like this game. What I want them to take from this is that gamers want to feel like they have agency. And gamers want to feel like the game is about them. Making your character something, making him the Tarnished, is genius, because then you, all throughout the game, you are something, and there's others like you in the world. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into a game that I really didn't understand, but finally came to understand the appeal, and I'm glad that I played it. I'm glad that I got to meet some of the really cool members of the community. And I hope that as this genre grows, people will learn to sort of take all the newbie nonsense in stride. So I saw someone online say if this game came out like 15, 20 years ago, all the secrets would take years to discover, and it would be like the only thing people talked about in school. And I think that's probably true. Everything's just condensed and discovered way faster now because everyone's in one ginormous community on the internet. I really enjoy the culture that this game creates, and I do hope that other game devs take some notes. Is it the best game ever? No. Is it in my top 100? Maybe. I think it's a really good game, and I did enjoy playing it, and I will come back to this game from time to time whenever I want to run around and experience some very satisfying combat. Let me know what you think of the game. I'm curious. Whatever I missed, there's some stuff I'm not all the way through the game yet, and that's why this is not an official review or anything like that. So let me know if there's anything I missed. Let me know what you think about this, and feel free to fill up the comments with all kinds of interesting stuff. I'll see you there.